Wizards of the Coast just released a deck list for a Phyrexian commander deck they're going to be selling next month. After looking over the deck list, I could say that they made an attempt to play Infect differently than what people are ordinarily used to playing. In honor of them making this change to the way we think about Infect, I'm going to be demonstrating a deck that I've built in the past that's based on Infect that plays it differently than what people ordinarily think. The hopes is that by the end of this video, if you enjoy what you see here, that you go out and you attempt to build Infect in your own way so that there can be many different ways to play Infect and poison counters in general. Again, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone that's subscribed to the channel and that comments on the channel. I genuinely appreciate it. It's just a quick way of saying thank you to me for making the videos that I make. Now, the commander that we have here is not really a commander that people would ordinarily play when it comes to playing Infect. However, I think that this commander is extremely unique and does an incredible job of putting people in a gotcha situation where you put your opponents in a lose-lose. And the commander in this deck is Etrata the Silencer. Now, when we talk about Etrata, why is Etrata an interesting Infect commander? Now, when we look at Etrata, Etrata says that Etrata, first of all, she can't be blocked. Okay. Etrata says that whenever she deals combat damage to a player, I get to exile a creature that player controls, and I put a hit counter on it. If that player has 3 or more creatures with hit counters in exile, they automatically lose the game. So essentially what ends up happening is that because we're playing around poison counters, we play around creatures that obviously have Infect. So I'm just going to grab one creature that has Infect over here. Remembering that with Infect or poison counters, if your opponent has 10 poison counters, they automatically lose the game. So either they get 3 creatures exiled or they get 10 poison counters and they lose, right? So the idea is, how do we make the most out of our creatures and this deck to put pressure on opponents by exiling their creatures and Infect? Like, how does this work? Why do they synergize with each other? So the way this works is we're gonna have our creature with Infect, right? Now, when this creature deals combat damage to an opponent, that opponent is gonna get 3 poison counters because this creature has 3 power, right? So in order for you to be able to do something about that, your opponent's gonna need a way to block your creatures. So your opponent has to play creatures to keep them from taking that damage. So you're forcing their hand. They have to have a creature on the board. Now, because they have to have creatures on the board, whenever I have the opportunity to play Etrata can't be blocked, right? So I can essentially attack with Etrata to remove my opponent's creatures so that I can deal Infect damage with my Infect creatures, giving them more poison counters. So your opponents are in a situation where it's a lose-lose. They need creatures to block our Infect creatures, and they also don't want to have creatures on the board, because if they get too many exiled because they're getting hit by Etrata, then it puts them in the place where now, you know, they can't win, essentially. So we also are playing a card called Grafted Exoskeleton and other cards with Infect inside the deck, but we'll just use this as an example that gives a creature +2/+2 with Infect. So essentially giving Etrata 5 power and Infect unblockable, which has the potential to just one-shot people out of the game. So outside of this, like, how is this beneficial to us when we're playing the game? Now, the thing is that when we're playing this deck, and what I noticed to be a positive side effect that I didn't realize was going to happen was that when I'm sitting there on the board and I have creatures with Infect, or you're generally playing an Infect deck, people don't want to attack you. People don't want to attack you because I'm sitting here with a creature, like you're going to see, with, you know, 3 power, right? And in a 10 life total game, this is almost half of a person's life total, because we're talking about poison counters, not their actual in-game life total. So 3 infect damage is a lot of damage to deal with. So what ends up happening is that because people are not going to want to attack us, once we have the ability to buff our creatures with Infect, we can then start attacking our opponents and then use things inside the deck that we have to either give our creatures vigilance or to untap them so we can use them to protect our life total. But when we're talking about protecting our life total and using them more offensively, and it's funny because these cards right here are actually printed in the Phyrexian sets. Like, I'm pretty sure this was printed in Scars of Mirrodin, and this card was printed in Mirrodin. And what you'll notice here is that this has flying and first strike. So it's going to give our infect creatures evasion, and at the same time it's going to give them first strike. This one is going to give them +1, and that 1 damage really matters in an infect deck, and it gives them first strike. And this card over here, which has nothing to do with either of those 2 cards in relation to the sets, but this gives first strike, trample, and haste, right? So why is that important? You know, when we're talking about playing Infect, Infect deals damage to creatures and players in the form of poison counters. So when we take a look at the creature over here, when this deals damage in the form of poison counters, in combination with having first strike that we see with the card over here, it's gonna hit the opponent's creature first, and suddenly that creature will gain the poison counters. So if we have this 5/5 over here, right? And let's imagine this card is just a 5/5, doesn't have Infect. Our creature with Infect will first strike this creature, right? So if it's gonna get +1, this will become a 4/2, and then it will deal that much damage to this Throat Seeker, right? This is a 5/5. The Throat Seeker is going to take 5 damage, and then will gain 4 -1/-1 counters, because this deals damage in the form of -1/-1 counters. Now, because that happens, the Throat Seeker that was once a 5/5 is now a 1/1, because it has 4 -1/-1 counters. So in actuality, this would deal damage to this, and I would still keep my Hand of the Praetors even though it's a 3/2. So you really put people in a position where they're not even sure what to do when they're playing, because even if they do block or they do attack, now you're just dropping their creatures' power and toughness, so you're just making the creatures infinitely weak. And in general, in my experience, you know, that 5/5 is a pretty big creature. Your creature will just destroy their creature, you know. And we also are playing cards like the Sorcerer's Queen and the Serendib Sorcerer, where you can just target a creature and make it a 0/2 until the end of turn. So when our creatures do make those trades, when our opponents are blocking with their creatures, that we can just consistently whittle their life total or their toughness down, so eventually we could destroy that creature. Because what's difficult to play around is sometimes your opponents are going to have creatures that have indestructible, and then they're just generally really good blockers. But the problem is that because we're playing Infect, even if your opponent has an indestructible creature, the -1/-1 counters eventually are going to add up to 0 and will potentially, not even potentially, will take them out of the game. Now, we do have other cards inside here that give our creatures haste and flying, so more evasion, right? Flying and haste, so that when I play my Infect creature, I can attack with my Infect creature immediately, or when I play Etrata, I can attack with Etrata immediately. And just to keep in mind with Etrata, there are ways inside the deck to bring Etrata back to your hand, because when Etrata deals combat damage to a player, we do have to bounce Etrata. Essentially, we have to exile, or we have to put Etrata back into our own library. So we want to play cards that are going to either bounce Etrata back to our hand or blink her so that she re-enters the battlefield, so that the next turn we can attack again. Although I will say I'd like to save those blink spells to protect Etrata, so that if somebody targets Etrata with removal, I would rather her go back to save her, exile something, than I would to set up a turn where I was being greedy and cast a spell on Etrata to go back to the battlefield after I dealt damage. Because, you know, I think in my experience I've lost games because of that, so it's just something to keep in mind. Now, we also have creatures obviously inside this deck that are Infect creatures, and we're just going to go over some of them, some of the ones that we have here. I will say in the future, this new Phyrexia set is releasing, so this deck list is going to change completely based off the cards that I can find inside that set that synergize here well. So I'm not going to put a deck list, just so you're aware, because it will change. So we have a Throatseeker, Viral Drake. This is a constant form of proliferate on one creature. Blighted Agent, Phyrexian Digester, you know, a Scourge Servant, Phyrexian Vat Mother. You know, a 4-power creature is 4 infect damage. You know, that's pretty devastating. Contagious Nim, Reaper of Sheldred, Necropede. You know, all these creatures are essentially just creatures here that have infect and deal infect damage, and when we buff them with some of the equipment and other cards that we have inside the deck that you're not seeing that buff their power and give them evasion, it puts your opponents in a place where they have to spend their removal on my 1/1. They have to spend their removal on my 2/2 because they have essentially 10 life points, right? The Toxic Nim is a great card. We also have Skitherix, the Blight Dragon, and then we also have Yawgmoth, which is just an infinite source of proliferate, depending on the number of cards we have in hand and the amount of mana we have available as well. So essentially, that's the Etrata deck. I find that this is not a deck where it's very friendly, because people tend to not like to play against Infect, but I think it's so unique in the games that I have played against it. People respect it because they're just like, wow, like I can't even believe that you're doing this right now. So that's just been my experience. In the future, I'm gonna end up upgrading this deck so that you'll be able to have a new idea or a better idea for how it plays after this new set that releases, that introduces a bunch of new cards that deals poison counter damage, and I'm sure that I'll be able to upgrade this. Okay, so if you enjoyed this video, remember that you can subscribe to the channel. It's just a really quick way to let me know that you enjoyed the video, and just a quick way to say thank you. I genuinely appreciate it. Always remember that we do have a Discord as well. You can join the Discord if you ever have any Magic the Gathering questions, any deck building questions. There's over 130 people in the Discord right now, and someone would be available, I believe, to help you at some time, okay, if not myself. Okay, always remember, eat healthy, okay, work out every single day, and most importantly, you got to remember to believe in yourself. All right, peace out, people.